ease has a way of hiding its consequences. What feels comfortable today can quietly become a source of weakness tomorrow. The Stoics understood this long before the modern world made convenience available at every moment. They did not measure a good life by the absence of struggle. They understood that challenge serves a purpose. It sharpens judgment. It strengthens character. It reveals whether a person is guided by principles or by convenience. While most people spend their lives trying to avoid discomfort, the Stoics moved toward it willingly because they knew that strength is not developed in ease. It is developed through resistance. Modern life offers endless opportunities to escape challenge. Every inconvenience can be avoided. Every moment of boredom can be filled. Every uncomfortable feeling can be distracted away with entertainment, consumption, or noise. Yet, despite all this convenience, anxiety continues to rise, attention grows weaker, and resilience becomes increasingly rare. The more comfort becomes a requirement, the harder it becomes to face uncertainty, adversity, and responsibility with confidence. The mind adapts to whatever it experiences repeatedly. When comfort becomes the standard, discomfort begins to feel like a threat rather than a teacher. The Stoics saw a different path. They believed that inner strength is built by facing reality directly, accepting responsibility, and remaining steady when circumstances become difficult. They understood that life will eventually test everyone, not to punish them, but to reveal what has been practiced all along. The question is not whether challenges will appear. They will. The question is whether the habits being built today will be strong enough to meet them when they do. The decision to get up when the alarm sounds, to finish a task without delay, or to remain composed when something minor goes wrong may seem unremarkable. Yet these actions become evidence of who you are becoming. They shape your responses quietly, often without notice. Each one strengthens or weakens the foundation beneath future decisions. Every ordinary choice leaves a mark. The mind is always becoming what it repeatedly practices. Marcus Aurelius frequently returned to this idea. A life is not assembled through intentions alone. It is assembled through actions. Every decision casts a vote for the person you are becoming. This is why small behaviors deserve more attention than they usually receive. Many people spend considerable energy thinking about the future version of themselves, yet neglect the habits that would create that future. They wait for confidence, motivation, clarity, or the perfect mood to arrive. Meanwhile, opportunities to grow pass unnoticed. Growth rarely arrives with excitement. It is quieter than that. It appears as repetition, patience, follow-through. The mind adapts to whatever it practices most often. If actions are delayed, delay becomes familiar. If actions are completed, completion becomes familiar. Over time, identity takes shape through these accumulated repetitions. The difficulty is that avoidance rarely looks dangerous in the moment. It often appears reasonable, even responsible. A person tells themselves they will begin tomorrow after they feel more prepared. They promise themselves they will focus once circumstances improve. They postpone the conversation, delay the task, or ignore the responsibility because another day seems harmless. Yet the mind records every retreat. Nothing disappears completely. Every excuse becomes evidence. Every delay becomes a lesson. The question is whether the lesson strengthens trust or weakens it. At first, the distance between intention and action is small. Over time, it expands. The person begins doubting whether commitments will actually be honored. Self-trust weakens gradually, not because ability disappears, but because promises are repeatedly abandoned. Soon hesitation feels natural, action feels difficult, and progress feels farther away than it truly is. The Stoics recognized that trust in yourself is one of the most valuable forms of strength. Without it, knowledge becomes harder to apply and goals become harder to pursue. When you consistently follow through, something changes. The mind stops resisting and starts cooperating. Energy that was once spent on negotiation becomes available for action. This is why discipline matters so deeply. It is not merely about productivity or achievement. It is about establishing a reliable relationship with yourself. Every completed action reinforces the belief that your decisions carry weight. Every fulfilled commitment strengthens confidence in your ability to act. The result is not arrogance or pride, but stability. You begin moving with less hesitation because experience has shown that your words and actions can remain aligned. That alignment becomes a source of strength. Once that alignment begins, another change follows. Responsibility no longer feels like an external burden imposed by circumstances. It becomes an expression of personal standards. The focus shifts away from feelings and toward principles. Some days will contain enthusiasm, others will not. The standard remains the same. This perspective removes much of the emotional turbulence that keeps people stuck. Instead of asking whether a task feels appealing, attention turns toward whether it should be done. That small shift creates enormous freedom. Decisions become clearer. Time is spent acting rather than debating. The mind becomes less reactive because it is no longer waiting for perfect conditions. It understands that conditions will always change. What matters is the willingness to move forward regardless. In this way, discipline becomes less about force and more about consistency. There is another consequence that receives less attention. When self-trust begins to erode, a sense of personal influence often erodes with it. A person starts feeling carried by circumstances rather than directing them. Challenges appear larger because confidence in responding has diminished. Minor obstacles create disproportionate frustration. Small setbacks feel like confirmation of weakness. Yet the obstacle is often not the challenge itself. It is the interpretation attached to it. The Stoics constantly return to the distinction between what can be controlled and what cannot. That distinction protects mental clarity. When attention remains on personal conduct, effort, judgment, and response, energy stays productive. When attention becomes trapped in outcomes, opinions, or uncertainties, energy becomes scattered. The mind functions best when it remains close to what it can actually direct each day. Ultimately, the process of becoming stronger is far less dramatic than most people expect. It does not require constant intensity or extraordinary determination. More often, it requires a willingness to respect small decisions. The person who repeatedly does what needs to be done builds momentum. The person who repeatedly honors commitments develops confidence. The person who remains steady during ordinary inconveniences prepares for larger challenges. This is why the Stoics placed such importance on daily conduct. They understood that life is lived in moments, not theories. A strong mind is built through repeated acts of attention and responsibility. Each choice strengthens a pattern. Each pattern shapes character. Each day offers another opportunity to practice that process. Over time, the distance between intention and action begins to disappear. What remains is reliability, and from reliability, real strength emerges. That disappearance is subtle. It rarely announces itself. Most people do not wake up one morning and suddenly feel incapable. The change happens gradually, almost beneath awareness. Confidence that once felt natural begins to fade around the edges. A task that once seemed manageable now feels heavier. A conversation that once required little thought becomes something to avoid. The mind starts treating ordinary challenges as potential threats. The person begins doubting their ability to handle discomfort, and that doubt quietly influences countless decisions throughout the day. At first, the changes appear insignificant. A small inconvenience creates irritation. A delay creates impatience. An unexpected problem feels larger than it truly is. Criticism lingers longer than it should. Minor setbacks occupy the mind for hours. These reactions often seem disconnected, but they are usually part of the same pattern. The mind adapts to what it experiences repeatedly. This adaptation is one of its greatest strengths, but it can also become a weakness when directed toward the wrong things. If comfort becomes constant, comfort starts feeling necessary. If ease becomes the standard, anything outside that standard begins to feel excessive. The threshold for discomfort lowers. What once felt normal now feels difficult. The Stoics understood this tendency well. They recognized that human beings naturally drift toward convenience when left unchecked. That drift does not happen because people are lazy by nature. It happens because the mind prefers familiarity. Familiar experiences require less effort to process. They create a sense of safety, yet safety and growth rarely occupy the same space for long. The more tightly a person clings to familiar conditions, the more threatening uncertainty begins to appear. Eventually, the goal becomes avoiding discomfort rather than developing strength. Life starts revolving around protection instead of progress. That shift is subtle, but its consequences are significant. This is why Stoic practice often included voluntary hardship. Seneca occasionally reduced his comforts on purpose. He wore simple clothing, ate modest meals, and lived with less than he could afford. He was not punishing himself. He was training perception. He wanted to see discomfort clearly instead of fearing it. More importantly, he wanted to prove to himself that he could function without constant convenience. Fear loses much of its influence when experience reveals that the thing being feared is survivable. Many anxieties grow larger simply because they remain untested. The mind imagines consequences that reality often fails to deliver. If the pursuit of wisdom, discipline, and a steadier mind matters to you, consider subscribing. As a commitment to returning regularly to ideas that challenge assumptions, strengthen character, and encourage a more deliberate way of living. There is an important difference between suffering and training. One is imposed, the other is chosen. The Stoics understood that choosing manageable forms of discomfort builds resilience before greater difficulties arrive. A person who occasionally practices restraint develops a different relationship with challenge. They become less shocked when circumstances are imperfect. They stop expecting life to unfold exactly as planned. Instead of reacting with frustration each time conditions change, they adjust. That ability to adjust is more valuable than most people realize. Flexibility often determines whether pressure becomes overwhelming or manageable. The modern world offers very few incentives to develop this capacity. Convenience is available almost everywhere. Discomfort is treated as something to eliminate immediately. Waiting feels unnecessary. Boredom feels unacceptable. Silence feels strange. Yet many of the qualities people admire most cannot develop without some degree of friction. Patience requires waiting. Discipline requires resistance. Endurance requires effort. Remove every obstacle, and the opportunity to develop those qualities begins to disappear. The result is not greater strength, but greater dependence on favorable conditions. This dependence often reveals itself emotionally before it reveals itself physically. Physical challenges are easier to recognize. Emotional discomfort is more subtle. It appears as disappointment that refuses to leave. It appears as resentment over situations that cannot be changed. It appears as anxiety about outcomes that have not arrived. The discomfort is real, but the struggle is often intensified by resistance to the experience itself. The mind wants certainty. It wants reassurance. It wants guarantees. When those guarantees fail to appear, unease grows. The Stoics approached emotional discomfort with the same principles they applied elsewhere. Instead of demanding that reality conform to their preferences, they worked to align themselves with reality. This did not mean becoming passive. It meant seeing situations clearly before reacting to them. Emotional reactions often gain power because they are accepted as facts. A feeling appears and immediately shapes behavior. Yet feelings are not always accurate guides. They are signals, not commands. The space between feeling and action is where wisdom begins to develop. Creating that space requires practice. The first impulse is rarely the most reliable one. Anger urges immediate response. Fear urges retreat. Frustration urges complaint. Following those impulses automatically may provide temporary relief, but it rarely produces clarity. The Stoics trained themselves to pause. That pause was not weakness. It was strength expressed through restraint. It created room for judgment. It allowed reason to examine what emotion presented. Over time, this habit changed the relationship between external events and internal reactions. What emerges from this process is not emotional numbness, but emotional stability. Difficult feelings still appear. Disappointment still arrives. Uncertainty remains part of life. The difference is that these experiences no longer dictate direction. The person develops confidence in their ability to endure them, and that confidence changes everything. Challenges stop feeling like threats to identity. Discomfort stops feeling like evidence of failure. It becomes part of the process rather than proof that something has gone wrong. The mind learns that growth and discomfort often travel together. Once that lesson is fully understood, resistance begins to lose its grip. Emotional discomfort is often more difficult to face than physical discomfort because it leaves no visible mark. A strained muscle can be seen. A wound can be treated. A broken object can be repaired. But disappointment, rejection, embarrassment, and uncertainty operate beneath the surface. They shape thoughts quietly. They influence decisions without announcing themselves. Everyone encounters these experiences sooner or later. No amount of preparation removes them entirely. What separates people is not whether they experience emotional pain, but how they understand it. Two people can face the same setback and walk away with completely different conclusions. One person sees a closed door and assumes they are not capable. Another sees the same door and assumes a different approach is needed. The event remains unchanged. The meaning attached to it becomes the turning point. This is why the teachings of Epictetus remain so relevant. He observed that human beings are often disturbed less by events themselves than by the judgments they attach to those events. A criticism arrives. A plan fails. An opportunity disappears. The immediate experience may be uncomfortable, but the deeper suffering frequently comes from the story built around it. The mind begins creating explanations. It predicts negative outcomes. It interprets temporary setbacks as permanent truths. Before long, the original event has become something much larger than it was. The emotional reaction is no longer responding to reality alone. It is responding to assumptions, fears, and conclusions that may not even be accurate. This process happens so quickly that it often escapes attention. A person receives disappointing news and immediately begins imagining everything that could go wrong. Another encounters rejection and instantly questions their worth. The emotional response feels justified because it arrives with such force, yet force does not guarantee accuracy. Strong emotions can create the illusion of certainty. They make conclusions feel true before those conclusions have been examined. This is one reason emotional discipline requires awareness. Without awareness, thoughts blend into facts, feelings blend into reality. The distinction disappears. When that happens, the mind becomes vulnerable to its own interpretations. The Stoics approached this challenge differently. They did not attempt to eliminate emotions or pretend they did not exist. They understood that emotions are part of being human. Fear, sadness, frustration, and anger arise naturally. The problem begins when these emotions take control of judgment. An emotion may provide information, but it should not automatically determine behavior. Anger can signal that something feels unfair. Fear can signal uncertainty. Disappointment can signal that expectations were not met. These signals can be useful. What matters is what happens next. The Stoic response begins with observation rather than immediate reaction. It creates space between feeling and action. That space is more powerful than it appears. Within it exists the ability to choose. Most impulsive decisions happen because there is no pause between emotion and response. A feeling emerges and behavior follows automatically. Words are spoken without reflection. Decisions are made without clarity. Regret often follows. The pause interrupts that pattern. It allows the mind to examine what is happening instead of being carried away by it. This is not suppression, it is guidance. It is the difference between being pulled by every emotional current and learning how to navigate through them with intention. As this habit develops, something important begins to change. External events lose some of their ability to dictate internal states. Difficult situations still occur, criticism still stings, failure still disappoints. Yet these experiences no longer possess the same authority. The mind becomes less reactive because it no longer treats every emotion as an instruction. Instead, emotions become objects of observation. They are noticed, understood, and placed into context. This shift creates stability. A person becomes capable of remaining steady even when circumstances become uncertain. Their reactions grow more deliberate. Their decisions become less dependent on temporary feelings. Much of anxiety comes from attempting to control what cannot be controlled. Much of frustration comes from resisting realities that already exist. The Stoics returned repeatedly to this insight because it simplified countless problems. Energy spent fighting the inevitable rarely produces useful results. Energy directed toward personal conduct, judgment, and effort often does. The moment attention returns to what can actually be influenced, the mind regains a sense of direction. The situation may not change immediately, but the relationship to the situation changes. That difference matters. Clarity begins replacing helplessness. Purpose begins replacing agitation. From there, attention naturally moves towards something even more significant. Once a person stops being governed by every passing emotion, they become more aware of where their focus is being directed each day. They notice how easily attention can be scattered or strengthened. They begin seeing that the quality of a life is shaped not only by what happens, but by what consistently receives mental energy. Thoughts influence actions. Actions influence habits. Habits influence character. The ability to guide attention toward what matters becomes one of the most important skills a person can develop. It is here that genuine self-command starts taking root, creating a foundation that remains steady even when the world around it refuses to cooperate. Attention is one of the most valuable resources a person possesses, yet it is constantly being pulled in different directions. Every notification asks for a response. Every headline asks for a reaction. Every platform asks for a few more minutes. Most of these requests seem harmless on their own, but their combined effect is significant. They fragment the mind. They divide energy. They make it difficult to remain fully present with any one thing for very long. This is one of the quiet challenges of modern life. People are surrounded by information, yet many struggle to find clarity. They consume more than ever before, but often feel less certain about where they are going. The problem is rarely a lack of input. More often, it is an inability to protect attention from constant interruption. The Stoics recognized that attention shapes experience. What the mind repeatedly focuses on eventually influences how reality is interpreted. Marcus Aurelius understood this well. Despite carrying enormous responsibilities, he repeatedly reminded himself to return to the present moment. He knew that the mind becomes weaker when it is scattered across countless concerns. Worry about the future steals energy from the present. Obsession with the past does the same. Attention loses its effectiveness when it is constantly divided between places where action is impossible. The present moment remains the only place where choices can be made, judgments can be improved, and effort can be applied. Returning to it again and again was not a passive exercise. It was a form of mental training. This training becomes increasingly important because distraction often disguises itself as productivity. A person may spend hours switching between tasks, answering messages, checking updates, and consuming information while feeling busy the entire time. Yet busyness and progress are not the same thing. Motion is not always movement. The mind can remain occupied without producing meaningful results. This creates a frustrating experience. Effort is being spent, but little seems to change. Days feel full, yet important goals remain untouched. The reason is simple. Attention has been divided into pieces too small to generate momentum. Each interruption forces the mind to restart. Each distraction pulls energy away from what matters most. Over time, this pattern creates consequences that extend beyond productivity. It begins influencing perception itself. A distracted mind struggles to appreciate what is directly in front of it. Conversations become shallower because attention is elsewhere. Work becomes less satisfying because focus is constantly broken. Even moments of rest lose some of their value because the mind remains restless. Many people assume exhaustion comes from doing too much. Sometimes it comes from paying attention to too many things at once. The mind was not designed to carry endless streams of competing information. It performs best when given a clear object of focus and enough time to engage with it fully. This is why intentional focus becomes such an important practice. The solution is not necessarily adding more discipline to every moment. Often it begins with removing unnecessary distractions. Small changes can create significant effects. A period of uninterrupted work, a walk without constant stimulation, a conversation without checking a device. These moments may appear simple, but they strengthen an important ability. They teach the mind how to remain with one thing instead of constantly searching for the next thing. That ability becomes increasingly valuable in a world built around interruption. The process is not always comfortable. The mind often resists sustained focus because distraction provides immediate rewards. New information creates stimulation. Constant novelty creates temporary excitement. Focus requires something different. It requires patience. It requires remaining with a task even when the initial enthusiasm fades. This is one reason concentrated effort feels challenging at first. The mind has become accustomed to frequent changes. Returning to stillness can feel unfamiliar, yet familiarity should not be mistaken for health. Many beneficial practices feel uncomfortable in the beginning precisely because they require different habits than those currently in place. The Stoics understood that mastery begins with directing attention deliberately rather than allowing circumstances to direct it. They knew that every moment of focus strengthens the ability to choose where the mind goes next. Every distraction resisted becomes evidence that attention is not entirely controlled by external forces. Every return to the task at hand reinforces the understanding that awareness can be guided rather than scattered. This process does not happen perfectly. The mind will wander, distractions will appear, attention will drift. The important thing is the return. Each return strengthens a pattern. Each repetition builds stability. Eventually, a noticeable shift begins to occur. The mind becomes calmer because it is no longer being pulled in every direction. Decisions become clearer because attention is less fragmented. Effort becomes more effective because it is concentrated rather than dispersed. A person starts experiencing the difference between reacting to everything and responding intentionally. That difference changes the quality of daily life. It creates space for deeper thinking, better judgment, and more meaningful action. Yet focus by itself is not enough to sustain long-term growth. Attention determines where energy goes, but something else determines whether that energy is applied consistently. Without that additional element, even the clearest focus eventually fades. This is why the Stoics anchored themselves to principles instead of emotions. Principles remain steady when emotions become unstable. They provide direction when uncertainty appears. A person guided by principles does not need to ask how they feel before deciding what to do. The decision has already been made. If something is worth doing, it is done. If a responsibility exists, it is addressed. This approach removes an enormous amount of internal conflict. Many people spend more energy debating action than taking action. They negotiate with themselves. They search for reasons to delay. They weigh options that have already been decided. By the time the debate ends, valuable time and energy have already been lost. Discipline eliminates much of this unnecessary struggle. The freedom that comes from this is often overlooked. Discipline is frequently portrayed as restrictive, but in practice it creates freedom. It frees the mind from endless negotiation. It reduces the burden of constant decision-making. It removes the emotional turbulence that comes from repeatedly postponing what needs to be done. A person no longer wakes up wondering whether they will follow through. They already know the answer. Their standards provide the answer before the question even appears. This creates stability. The mind becomes calmer because it is no longer trapped in a cycle of hesitation and guilt. Energy that was once consumed by indecision becomes available for meaningful effort. Over time, something important begins to develop. Self-trust starts to grow. This type of trust is different from confidence based on praise, talent, or success. It comes from repeated evidence. Each completed task becomes proof. Each promise honored becomes proof. Each moment of persistence during difficulty becomes proof. The mind begins collecting these experiences and forming a new conclusion. It starts recognizing that your words carry weight. When you say you will do something, there is evidence that you mean it. This may seem simple, but its effects are profound. Many people underestimate how much strength comes from believing in their own reliability. The Stoics understood that character is shaped through repetition. One decision matters, but repeated decisions matter more. A single act of discipline is valuable. Hundreds of acts of discipline create identity. Eventually, certain behaviors stop feeling like effort and start feeling natural. The person no longer forces themselves to follow through. Follow through becomes part of who they are. This is why consistency matters so much. It transforms actions into habits and habits into character. The process is gradual, but its effects accumulate. Small actions repeated over long periods produce results that seem disproportionate to the effort invested. What appears ordinary in the moment becomes significant when viewed across months and years. Yet discipline faces a challenge that is often difficult to recognize. It is not always defeated by laziness or distraction. Sometimes it is weakened by something far more subtle. A person may develop routines, maintain commitments, and remain productive while still being influenced by forces they barely notice. Their actions appear disciplined, but their direction remains dependent on something outside themselves. They continue seeking reassurance. They continue adjusting their behavior according to the expectations of others. Their effort remains connected to approval rather than conviction. This dependence creates a hidden vulnerability because anything that relies on external validation can be shaken when that validation disappears. The danger is not that approval feels good, praise is natural, encouragement has value. The danger begins when approval becomes necessary. Once that happens, judgment becomes compromised. Decisions become influenced by acceptance rather than principle. A person starts measuring progress through the reactions of others instead of the standards they have chosen for themselves. This creates instability because public opinion changes constantly. What is admired today may be criticized tomorrow. What is praised in one environment may be rejected in another. A person who builds their sense of direction on those shifting foundations eventually finds themselves pulled in conflicting directions. Even strong discipline struggles to remain intact when it is attached to a need for approval. That invisible weakness quietly undermines the very independence that discipline was meant to create. The need for approval is one of the most powerful influences on human behavior because it rarely presents itself as a weakness. It often disguises itself as kindness, cooperation, ambition, or the desire to be understood. A person tells themselves they simply want harmony. They tell themselves they care about maintaining good relationships. They tell themselves they are being considerate. While these things can be healthy, there is a point where consideration becomes dependence. There is a point where the desire to be accepted begins shaping decisions more than personal judgment. When that happens, a person's direction slowly moves away from what they believe is right and toward what they believe will be approved. This shift is often difficult to notice because it develops gradually. Small adjustments are made to avoid criticism. Opinions are softened to prevent disagreement. Goals are postponed because they may not be understood by others. Over time, these compromises accumulate. The person begins measuring choices through a different standard. Instead of asking whether something aligns with their values, they ask whether it will be accepted. Instead of considering whether an action is meaningful, they consider whether it will be appreciated. The focus moves outward. The opinions of others begin occupying space that should belong to personal judgment. Eventually, the person may find themselves living according to expectations they never consciously chose. The Stoics recognized this danger because they understood how unstable public opinion can be. Praise and criticism are both temporary. They change according to circumstances, preferences, trends, and emotions. What earns admiration from one person may invite disapproval from another. A choice celebrated today may be questioned tomorrow. If peace depends on these reactions, peace becomes impossible to maintain. The mind is forced into a constant state of adjustment, always seeking approval and always fearing its loss. This creates a fragile existence because the foundation is built upon something that cannot be controlled. The Stoics refused to place their well-being on such uncertain ground. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself repeatedly that the value of an action is not determined by the number of people who approve of it. A truthful statement remains truthful, whether it is praised or criticized. A virtuous action remains virtuous, whether it is noticed or ignored. This perspective creates an important shift. It moves attention away from appearance and back toward substance. The question stops being, "How will this be received?" and becomes, "Is this the right thing to do?" That shift simplifies many decisions. It removes countless distractions created by the desire to manage perceptions. The mind becomes less occupied with reactions and more concerned with conduct. This does not mean rejecting all feedback or refusing to learn from others. The Stoics valued wisdom wherever it could be found. Advice can be useful. Criticism can reveal blind spots. Different perspectives can improve understanding. The difference lies in who maintains final authority. A person who depends on approval allows others to determine their direction. A person guided by principles listens carefully but decides independently. They remain open without becoming controlled. They learn without becoming dependent. Their judgment stays rooted in reflection rather than popularity. There is a remarkable sense of freedom that emerges from this approach. Energy that was once spent managing impressions becomes available for more meaningful pursuits. The constant need to explain, justify, or defend every choice begins to fade. A person no longer feels compelled to seek permission before acting. They stop waiting for universal agreement because they understand it will never arrive. They become more comfortable standing alone when necessary, not because they enjoy isolation, but because they trust their reasoning enough to continue forward despite disagreement. This trust becomes a source of stability during uncertain moments. The need for approval often creates a subtle form of performance. People begin presenting versions of themselves that they believe will be accepted. Certain thoughts remain unspoken. Certain interests remain hidden. Certain ambitions remain unexplored. The performance may succeed externally, but it often creates tension internally. Maintaining an image requires constant effort. It creates a gap between appearance and reality. The larger that gap becomes, the more exhausting life feels. The person is no longer simply living. They are managing perceptions. They are protecting an image. They are responding to expectations that may not even reflect who they truly are. When approval loses its position at the center of decision-making, that tension begins to dissolve. There is less need to perform because there is less need to impress. Attention returns to growth rather than appearance. Effort returns to substance rather than presentation. The focus shifts toward developing qualities that remain valuable regardless of who is watching. Patience becomes important. Integrity becomes important. Reliability becomes important. These qualities do not depend on applause. They exist whether they are recognized or not. Their value comes from what they contribute to character rather than reputation. This is where a deeper transformation begins. The person stops treating life as something to be displayed and starts treating it as something to be built. Daily actions become more important than public recognition. Private conduct becomes more important than public image. The desire to appear strong gradually gives way to the desire to become strong. As substance becomes the priority, a new level of confidence starts to emerge. It is quieter than the confidence created by praise. It does not require constant reinforcement. It comes from knowing that actions align with principles. It comes from understanding that decisions are being made deliberately rather than reactively. This confidence is difficult to shake because it is rooted in conduct rather than opinion. And when a person reaches that point, they begin experiencing life differently. They stop asking whether they are being recognized and start asking whether they are living well. From there, something even more meaningful begins to take shape. A person's life itself starts becoming an example of the values they have chosen to uphold. Eventually, the goal changes. In the beginning, most people want to become stronger because they are tired of feeling weak. They want more confidence, more discipline, more control over their reactions. Those are worthwhile goals, but something interesting happens as progress begins to accumulate. The focus gradually moves away from strength itself and toward the kind of person that strength makes possible. The desire to overcome challenges becomes a desire to live in a way that reflects certain principles. Improvement stops being about proving something and starts being about becoming something. This shift is subtle, but it changes the entire direction of the journey. The Stoics understood that character is not revealed through declarations. It is revealed through behavior. A person can speak endlessly about courage, patience, honesty, or discipline, but words alone carry very little weight. People learn what you value by watching what you repeatedly do. They notice how you respond when plans fall apart. They notice how you behave when there is no reward waiting at the end. They notice whether your actions remain consistent when circumstances become inconvenient. Character becomes visible through repetition, not through performance, not through explanation, through conduct. This is one reason the Stoics placed such importance on ordinary days. They understood that most of life is not dramatic. Most of life consists of small decisions repeated over and over again, getting out of bed when you planned to, finishing responsibilities before seeking comfort, remaining calm during minor frustrations, speaking truthfully when dishonesty would be easier. These moments rarely attract attention. They do not create headlines, yet they shape the person you become. Every action reinforces a pattern. Every pattern strengthens a tendency. Over time, those tendencies become character. Many people wait for a defining moment to prove themselves. They believe that when the real test arrives, they will somehow rise above their current habits. The Stoics viewed this belief with skepticism. They knew that pressure does not magically create virtues that have never been practiced. More often, pressure reveals what has already been developed. A person who has practiced patience is more likely to remain patient during difficulty. A person who has practiced self-control is more likely to remain composed when emotions run high. Preparation is not something that happens when the challenge arrives. Preparation happens long before it arrives. This understanding creates a different relationship with daily life. Ordinary moments stop feeling insignificant. Small actions gain importance because they are recognized as opportunities to strengthen character. The way you respond to minor inconveniences matters because it influences how you will respond to major ones. The way you handle today's responsibilities influences how you will handle tomorrow's challenges. Nothing exists in isolation. Every choice contributes to a larger pattern. Every repeated behavior becomes part of the foundation you stand upon. As this process continues, certain actions begin feeling less like effort and more like identity. In the beginning, discipline may require constant attention. Following through may feel difficult. Resisting distractions may feel uncomfortable. Yet repetition changes things. What once required conscious effort gradually becomes natural. The person no longer forces themselves to act responsibly. Responsibility becomes part of who they are. They no longer struggle to remain composed in every situation. Composure becomes familiar. The behaviors that once felt unnatural become automatic because they have been practiced enough times to take root. This transformation does not create perfection. The Stoics never expected perfection from themselves or from anyone else. They understood that mistakes remain part of the human experience. There will still be setbacks. There will still be moments of frustration, disappointment, and uncertainty. The difference is that these experiences no longer carry the same power. They do not create collapse. They do not erase progress. The person has developed a foundation strong enough to absorb difficulty without losing direction. Challenges remain difficult, but they stop feeling overwhelming. Something deeper also begins to emerge. Confidence changes its source. It is no longer built on success, recognition, or favorable circumstances. Those things are too unstable. They come and go. Instead, confidence becomes rooted in experience. It comes from repeatedly facing discomfort and discovering that it can be endured. It comes from keeping promises made to yourself. It comes from recovering after setbacks rather than avoiding them. This kind of confidence is quieter than the confidence built on achievement, but it is also more durable. It remains present even when outcomes are uncertain. People often notice this quality in others before they can explain it. There is a certain steadiness that comes from living according to principles rather than moods. It appears in how a person speaks. It appears in how they respond under pressure. It appears in their ability to remain grounded when circumstances become chaotic. They do not need to convince anyone of their character because their behavior does the work for them. Their actions become their message. Their consistency becomes their reputation. The result is not a life free from difficulty. The Stoics never promised such a life. What emerges instead is a person who can meet difficulty differently. They no longer depend on ideal conditions to function well. They no longer require constant reassurance before taking action. They understand that discomfort is part of growth, uncertainty is part of life, and setbacks are part of progress. Most importantly, they trust themselves, not because they believe they will never struggle, but because experience has shown that they can endure struggle and continue forward. That trust becomes one of the strongest forms of strength a person can possess. It is earned slowly, built through countless ordinary choices, and carried into every challenge that follows. Strength is not built in a single moment. It is built in the choices no one sees, in the responsibilities you accept, in the discomfort you stop running from, and in the standards you continue to uphold when life becomes difficult. The Stoics understood that character is not something you find, it is something you build, one decision at a time. If these ideas resonated with you, take a moment to continue the journey by watching one of the videos on your screen. The next lesson may be exactly what you need to hear right now. And thank you for being part of Stoic Journal. Your time, attention, and commitment to growth are deeply appreciated. Until next time, stay disciplined, stay thoughtful, and continue becoming the person you are capable of being.